think about, if this is my last talk, what do I leave behind? What do I pass on if I'm out of time? That is, how would I like to be remembered? And not just if I'm leaving this body, but, what if I'm leaving this community? We have lasts all the time. Now, today's topic is about life and death. And it's part of our series on Glow Up. The last part, life and death. Now, I am the last person who should be talking about life and death because I've only experienced the life side of that. I haven't experienced death. Not a lot of us have. Not even a near-death experience, which lots of people have experienced, just not me. So if I'm speaking for myself. I only know what other people have said, and that runs the gamut. So I can share with you what Ernest Holmes said in his book, Words That Heal Today. He said, God is life. Life cannot produce death. Death is but the shifting of a scene, the moving of one place to another. It's an impatient gesture of the soul as it seeks freedom. Again, life and death. And it may not be the physical death that we're talking about. I think we can apply this to any time that we leave the scene. Lots of things happen. Ernest Holmes also tells us, I believe in the continuation of the personal life beyond the grave, in the continuity of the individual stream of consciousness with a full recollection of itself and the ability to know and to make itself known. Hence our affirmation for today, my eternal light is now. Let's say that again. My eternal light is now. So many traditions talk about life after death. It's one of the things that religion does best, is it talks about death. It gives us hope. Our Declaration of Principles that was first published in the Science of Mind magazine talks that Ernest Holmes wrote. He says, we believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of individual soul forever and ever expanding. So as I was working on this talk, as often happens, an interesting item came into my mailbox. We don't often get these. This was an invitation to a death cafe. Now, unfortunately, this death cafe was taking place in Paris, or I might have gone. So what is a death cafe was my question, and you may ask the same question. So I looked it up. So there is a death cafe website, and there they talk about it. They say at a death cafe, people, often strangers, and who could be stranger than us, gather to eat cake, I like that part, drink tea, and discuss death. Their website states, our objective is to increase awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of their lives. At Death Cafe, a group it has directed discussion of death with no agenda, objectives, or themes. It's discussion group rather than a grief support group or a counseling session. So I checked out their Facebook page, and as it turns out, they also have a most interesting sense of humor. Let's start with this first drawing. Because it's Halloween, I thought it was appropriate. I'm not wearing a costume, says the Grim Reaper. I'm here to take your, oh my goodness, full-size Snickers. Never mind, Margaret, we're good. Perfect for Halloween. I hope you have the full-size bars. And then this is the other part that they talk about. One thing that we can be sure of in this life is death. And one thing that's incredibly hard to talk about is death. And here's the truth. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about death won't make you dead. And this John Underwood, he's actually the founder of Death Cafe. Another humor from their site. She talked a lot about the things she wanted to do on the tombstone. He spent a lot of time looking at strangers' Instagram accounts. She enjoyed herself. She wrote that book. Another tombstone. She was afraid to start. And another one. She spent 5 decades comparing herself to others. Any of that sound familiar? Here's one. Working at a hospice, I asked a woman, "What is it like to know that you're dying?" And she responded, "What's it like pretending that you aren't?" And then from the Buddha, everything that has a beginning has an end. Make your peace with that, and all will be well. So all of these things made me think. Some made me chuckle a little bit, and others I just thought, wow, I never thought of it that way. So that's why I wanted to share it with you today. Maybe we can have our own little death cafe right here. Anyhow, that death cafe led me to a death doula, which obviously is a thing too. And this is what she had to say. She said, "Death is all around us. The news is full of stories of tragedy, disease, and disaster. As we age, we witness our bodies decline and inch towards death, even though we don't like to think about it that way. Through our lifetimes, our skin flakes off daily, new cells are generated, babies are born in families after a person has died, new shoots appear in a plant that shed its leaves. It's all part of the natural cycle of life. Without death, we wouldn't have life." Okay, I can agree with all that. And then she goes on, she says, "However commonplace and inevitable it is, most of us have a fear of talking about death, even though we might think about it. We may consciously eat a healthy diet as to live long. We may drive carefully so as not to get in an accident. We may avoid traveling in dangerous areas so not to be a victim. We may refrain from smoking as so not to shorten our life," and so on. And some fear even talking about death may somehow bring it upon prematurely, just like we saw in that little cartoon, talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about death won't make you dead. I have to remember that. But truthfully, most of us are unable to control when and how our deaths will ultimately occur. She goes on, "It doesn't always follow logical thinking. Sometimes a young person who's very healthy dies, or an elderly, seemingly unhealthy person lives for a very long time. And so what do we make of this? When someone we love dies, it can be one of the hardest things we go through. And we have the added burden of a society where talking about death is taboo. And this leads to depression and isolation." So there we are. All of us at some point are going to die. And yet, I really don't want to talk about it. And I'm glad that you tuned in today so that we could. And it's something that's absolutely across our society, especially now where death is kind of sterilized. We don't really see dead people. We see them at the last minute, if we go to their memorial service or something. There's a story in the Bhagavad Gita where the Prince Arjuna, who's one of the heroes of the story, is asked a question. And this is what he said: "What is the strangest thing in the world?" And now in the story, Arjuna has to get the answer right, because if he doesn't get the answer right, he dies. And so Arjuna, being the wise prince that he is, says, "The answer to this question, what is the strangest thing in the world, is that millions of people die every day, and yet even knowing this, people do not believe that they will also die." And so I have to come at this from another direction. So it's not really a morbid question about dying, because we know everybody's going to die, and most of us just don't know when. And I was thinking about this. Last Thursday, we were at the YCMA, and I was in the pool in the middle of my aqua aerobics class, and the lights went out. Now, in the pool area, it was plenty light enough, but we still were ushered out of the pool, sopping wet, without a chance to collect our belongings. And I thought, maybe that's the way it is when you die. The lights go out, and you're simply ushered out of the body temple. although lights eventually there would come back on again. So the following is a quote from the inside cover of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, The Wheel of Life, a memoir of living and dying. And she wrote this to a letter to a child with cancer. And she said, when we have done all the work we came to earth to do, we are allowed to shed our body, which imprisons our soul the way a cocoon encloses the future butterfly. And when the time is right, we can let go of it and we'll be free of pain, free of fear, and free of worries, free as a beautiful butterfly returning home to God. Now, Ernest Holmes says something similar. He says, nature has designed that when by any reason this physical instrument is no longer fit for the soul, spirit is severed from it. And we should live as if we were immortal now. All fear of death should disappear, and we should look forward to this final event with no sense of dread. It is just as natural to die to this life as it was to be born into it. So I know this is all over the place, and as you can tell, I have no answers. But it has come to me that maybe it's important to contemplate and maybe to move through the fear of death. Several years ago, I was talking with a friend, and she told me her father was afraid of dying. And we talked a little bit, and I shared with her another thing that I love from Ernest Holmes. And this is from the Science of Mind textbook. And I love this piece because it gives me that feeling of the continuation of life. This is what he writes. He said, when we came into this life, we were met by loving friends who cared for us until we were able to care for ourselves. And judging the future by the past, we can believe that when we enter the larger life, there will be loving hands to greet us and loving friends to care for us until we become accustomed to our new surroundings. Nature provides for herself there as well as here. We confidently expect to meet friends who are on the other side and to know and to be known. We should not look forward to a hereafter without activity, but to a place where our work will be done in greater harmony with divine law because of a greater understanding. A place where there was nothing to do would be eternal boredom. So, we don't know how to be born. We didn't know, and yet we were. And we don't know how to die. But there are helpers along the way. There are always helpers. And you might be one of them. Several years ago, a work friend of mine died suddenly in his sleep. And I went to the funeral, the graveside interment. And later that night, as I lay in bed, I was contemplating, like, what would I have said to Jay? You know, having one of those one-sided conversations. Have you ever done that late at night? And then I heard a voice in my head, and it said, how long do I have to stay in this box? And I thought, well, you are free to go wherever you want. Just follow the light. And so I was repeating what I'd heard, follow the light. And then I thought, well, you know, I'm no expert, but maybe I need to learn something here. So when I was in ministerial school, I heard about a practice called death yoga, which is more than just the corpse pose that is traditionally used at the end of a yoga session. This was Professor Amit Goswami. Now, he is a theoretical nuclear physicist and a former professor at the University of Oregon. He was one of our professors in the Holmes Institute, and he was known for his work on consciousness and its role in reality. And the book that we were using was his book, The Physics of the Soul. Now, Physics of the Soul, Science of Mind. So there's science in there. So, you know, I had a lot to do. I wasn't paying very close attention, but that idea stuck with me. So I went back to the lecture notes, and this is what I found. The idea of death yoga is to use death itself as a moment of waking up, or we might say enlightenment, waking up to that unity that we are. So Goswami in his books talks about 3 methods of death yoga. One is the death prayer. You want to be prayerful at the moment of death. And how do you know what that moment of death is? Well, you don't know. So the idea is to practice that prayer every moment you're conscious. So every moment you're conscious, you're constantly saying this prayer. For example, God is love. And with practice, then this prayer is never far from your lips. Now, for years, I've been repeating, God is, I am. And sometimes I just shorten it to, God is. And this death prayer, Gandhi used this method actually. When he died, he instantly said Ram. And Ram is the name of God. So he had the death prayer, Ram, 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 going on in his mind all the time. So when somebody shot him, he said Ram. And this is liberating. So that's one method of death yoga. Now, the next method is sacrifice, and that is sacrifice of the ego. And Goswami tells us eventually your chance in encountering the clear light at the moment of death would be increased when you see your role as more for others than for self. And for an example of this, we have, of course, the crucifixion of Jesus the Christ. Now, the third method is meditation. And so Goswami quoted Bhagwan Sri Rama Maharishi. He was a great sage who died earlier in the 20th century. Now, he was a boy of 16 when he had a strange feeling that he was going to die. And he said, a falling fear of death overtook me. So he began this process of thinking about death, and first in the larger sense, and then becoming more and more subtle. And he started imagining himself having rigor mortis. And he lay down and he started meditating on the process of dying. But he didn't die. He had a realization. He said, it flashed through me vividly as living proof that I perceived directly almost without thought process. That I was something very real. The only real thing about my present state and all the conscious activity with my body was centered on I. Fear of death vanished. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. When the body was engaged in talking, reading, or anything else, I was still centered on I. This I is the quantum self, that larger I am. Now remember, Amit Goswami is a nuclear physicist known for his work, again, physics of the soul. So this is where he's coming from. And now, quantum physics, even when I read the book and now, it's beyond my understanding. But it's not beyond my belief in the science. And I did find it an interesting way to look at science, death, life. Okay, now, in my going down the rabbit hole, I found another piece that I thought was interesting, and I wanted to share that with you. This is an article from Aaron Freeman. I'm paraphrasing it here. He says, you want a physicist to speak at your funeral. You want the physicist to talk about to talk to your grieving family about the conservation of energy, so they will understand that your energy has not died. You want the physicist to remind them about the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. You want them to know that all your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that was you remains in this world. You want the physicist to say that all the photons that ever bounced off your face, all the particles whose paths were interrupted by your smile, by the touch of your hair, hundreds of trillions of particles have raced off like children, their ways forever changed by you. May the physicists let them know that all the protons that ever bounced from you were gathered in the particle detectors that are their eyes. But those photons created within them constellations of electromagnetically charged neurons whose energy will go on forever. And the physicist will remind the congregation of how much all of our energy is given off as heat. And there may be a few fanning themselves with their programs, as he says it. And he will tell them that the warmth that flowed through you in life is still there, still part of all that we are, even as we mourn and we continue the heat of our own lives. So, according to the law of the conservation of energy, not a bit of you is gone. You're just less orderly. How about that for memorial service reading? When I was in practitioner studies, one of our assignments in year 2 was to write our memorial service. And I did that, but it was a long, long time ago. And I've learned a thing or two since then, believe me. However, one of the things that I would not change is the song that I wanted sung. And okay, here it is. Row, row, row your boat. Yeah, that one. It tells me everything I need to know. First, row, row, and row again. That is, do what you've come here to do and put some energy into it and don't give up. It's kind of like that musical version of treat and move your feet. And then secondly, down the stream, gently, gently down the stream. Be gentle with yourself and just go with the flow. And the third line, I know you know it, merrily, happily, cheerfully. Of course, I do everything merrily because after all, that's my name. And I was kind of surprised to see there's a little darker definition of the word merrily. It's like being without concern about the problems that your actions might cause. Okay, I do that too, but that's not what they mean. And lastly, life is but a dream. We are here thinking that we are this human being and yet knowing we have that spiritual life. Life is but a dream. So here's the question. Do you have a theme song? Maybe you want to put it in the chat? How would you like to be remembered? A few weeks ago, we went to a taping at the local PBS station. It was an interview for the show Overheard with Evan Smith, and he was interviewing Jane Goodall. Yes, one of the last times. He remarked about how busy she was at this stage in her life, and she replied that at her age, she had to hurry up to complete all that she wanted to do in her life. And shortly thereafter, she was gone. And perhaps you saw the Netflix special with her last words. She said, "You have it in your power to make a difference. Don't give up. Do your best while you're still on this beautiful planet Earth that I look down upon from where I am right now." And so Ernest Holmes tells us we prepare not to die, but to live. The thought of death should slip from our consciousness altogether. And when this great event of the soul takes place, it should be beautiful, sublime, a glorious experience, as the eagle, freed from its cage, rises to its original height. So the soul, freed from its home in a heavy flesh, will rise and return unto its Father's house. So let's take this into our meditation today. Just knowing that there is one power, one presence, one infinite source, one omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, one energy. In whatever form, it is still that divine source, that first cause, that energy of all life, that energy of the continuing consciousness. And when we recognize this, we know that we are part of it because there is nothing else. There's only that one. And so knowing that we are part and parcel of that divine life, that just as that life is before we were born and after we die, that life continues always. And it is from this place of unity, of oneness with all life, that I speak this word today for each and every person listening. I know that the truth is that God is all there is. By whatever name we call it, that divine energy, that as it moves in and through us, it creates form and it dissipates that form. It grows abundance of leaves on trees, and then they fall. And then there are new leaves born. This is the cycle of life. And we are in the cycle of life. And so let us today make the most of that, sharing our abundance, sharing our love, sharing what we've come here to do, to be, being, being all that we are, allowing that divine life to move through us, in us, as us, around us, and for us. And knowing that as we do so, for the highest good of all concerned, this world is orderly. It works in perfect and divine right order, in perfect right timing. And so we share our love, our abundance, our gratitude. And so it is with great gratitude that I simply release this word into the law that has already said yes so many times. And it says yes again and again. And so I let it be. I relax into the knowing that all is well. All is well. And so it is.